We'll get started. If there's anybody else to come trickling in, we'll get going. Obviously, welcome. Welcome back for most of you. Again, I'm Mark Valentine, Mike O'Connor from staff, Phyllis Ely's our communication specialist, Doug Sangster will be handling the visuals tonight. Again, I've got a lot of information to kind of share. Please jump in, ask questions as stuff goes along. Before we get started, any questions from what we gave you last week? Anything that came up or struck you since our last discussion? Okay. Again, I'll be throwing a lot at you, but I have some visual aids on the wall. We'll kind of get into those. On your far right is our zoning map. So that's the official zoning map of the town of Penfield. Looking behind you, for those of you on that side. So that is our official town zoning map. That's going to be the majority of our discussion tonight. That is kind of the driving force of most everything we do is based on what it is zoned. So we're going to go through section 250, which we gave you, go through the residential zoning districts, what's in a commercial zoning district, because that's what we base all of our stuff on. That's what the boards base their decisions on, is how does it fit in the zoning, does it meet the laws, requirements, and everything else. So you can kind of see most of it's white. That's the residential portions. So you see numbers like R120, that's residential, 1 unit per 20,000 square feet. We call that half-acre zoning. You get into R1 as it goes further out, RA2, and then you see other colors of, general business is green, pink is kind of the MR, townhouse developments. We have limited industrial, which is kind of yellow in the lower left. That's kind of the Panorama 441 area. So that's kind of the Panorama-ish area. You can see 250, 441 just to the right of that, the green and the pinks, and then you can kind of see Baytown Plaza. We have some smaller commercial areas, obviously the Four Corners, but that kind of highlights some of the areas on the maps, and we'll go through those and we'll go through what the zoning is, because some of the stuff we're going to ask this committee is to look at, are there changes needed in our zoning code? Are there areas of town that are changing from residential and tending towards more commercial? Is there areas of town, obviously one of the things, and we've got another committee running on Tuesday nights, is, Shadow Pines and the other areas of town, golf courses aren't life use anymore, as we're seeing, and some of those areas are turning over. So, as we said last week, everything has an underlying zoning. Shadow Pines is zoned R120 currently, but that may be something as a consideration for this committee is, should it be zoned something else? Should the other golf courses, we've got quarries, and then that is not also our land use map. So that's something else we'll go through tonight, is talking about, that is what zoning is. There's many things that predate our zoning. So you've got uses out there that don't comply with it. We'll call those either pre-existing non-conforming. We've got historical properties that are slightly different. We've got different zoning areas that fall under the town board jurisdiction, planning board jurisdiction. So that's a little bit of each with that. The other two maps on the wall, and there's one behind that, as we get further on, and one of the questions that came up last week is talking about how our approval or planning process works internally from start to finish. So we'll kind of lead the group through some of those items. Talk about a development. The one on the right, or the middle, is the new Verizon store that's up on Empire Boulevard near Baytown Plaza. That's their site plan. The one on the left here is the Windsor Ridge development. That's the new Ryan Home development at the corner of 5 Mile and Atlantic. Picked that one because it's current, it's under construction, and also utilize something that's called Town Law 278. So we'll get into that, talking about what you have to do a conventional plan and what cluster development is and some of that stuff. So, any initial questions with that? As we shared last time, this is being videoed. There is a web page up on our main page for this committee, so you can go to there for resources. It has the video, they've time logged it, so as we go through our agenda, you can kind of scroll ahead to different sections if you do ever miss a meeting. Anybody have any issues with Google Docs? I know Zach was putting up the Google Docs, and we'll continue to do that as we have documentation and provide that for everybody to have access to the electronic stuff for that. We do also have updated contacts. Some people reached out to us last time and said my number was slightly off and changed, so I can pass those around. You can pass pass those around. Please, again, check, make sure we've got your latest and correct information on that. With that, I say I'll kind of do a start of, overview of planning and zoning. Let's at least talk about an overview of the town of Penfield first. So the town of Penfield encompasses 35 square miles. There's over 13,000 households within Penfield, which as of the 2010 census was 36,000 residents. We're trending towards, we're thinking 37, almost 38,000, potentially coming up in this next census. One of the things we're going to note as we go through zoning is, while it seems like we have a lot of commercial properties, of the 13,000 parcels we have, only 380 are currently zoned commercial, which is only 3% of the town as a whole. So that's one area we'll look at as we go through, just to kind of keep some perspective, and we can provide you guys with information on how much park land we have, how much municipal owned land we have, how much is zoned MR for different districts as comparison. Obviously, many are involved in the school districts. There's 4 elementary schools, Bay Trail, and then Penfield High School. But also, one of the issues that obviously Penfield always struggles with is the misnomer of, is it Penfield, is it Webster? Obviously, the top half of the town goes to Webster schools, is in the Webster zip code. We have 6 or 7 different zip codes within Penfield, so there's not just a Penfield zip code. Most people think Baytown Plaza is in the town of Webster. That's something the town is constantly working on, is trying to rebrand that and to have people understand that that's still Penfield. You're in Penfield all the way up till Dunkin' Donuts on Empire Boulevard, and most people think you're well into Webster at that point. Going along that corridor, as well as thinking LaSalle's Landing maybe is a Rondequoit or something down by the bay. So that's another area we'll be talking about. So we'll be jumping into chapter 250. This sets what our zoning code is, what we base the boards base their judgments on it, and their approvals. The majority of our code was updated, and we had a major change in 1981. Prior to 1981, the entire town was half-acre zoning. So that's why you can see pockets of area if anybody's out Herman's Road on the map, and I'll try not to blind anybody. Way out in East Penfield, we have less than half-acre houses all in one dense area. So partially because of them, we have no sewers out there. They're on septic system. Being on septic system, if you have small lots, obviously it doesn't work all that well. So that was part of the drive to rezone Penfield, and it was kind of done in 1981 to say, okay, Western Penfield has sewers, has water, has availability of all utilities, and then as we travel east, we kind of do a step down from there, so it goes half-acre, 1 acre, and then 2 acre, kind of in East Penfield. At 1981, that was temporary, so it's not a cast in stone forever. That's part of this committee to look at. Right now, it is still kind of held by the sewer units that are out there, or the sewer availability. That's one thing we'll also talk about. Most of our sewers go west and go down to the county interceptor, once run through Panorama, runs along the bay, and eventually ends up in Van Leer, up by Lake Ontario. The other half, or a third goes into Webster. Right now, Webster is working on an update to the village system and their own system. So they're looking at a consolidated system, possibly getting rid of the village treatment plant and then consolidating with the town, and then doing, I think they're talking about an $11 million upgrade. So we're looking at some restrictions in sewer capacity kind of on the north end of town in that area, and then another piece of our sewers drain into Perrington on the south end, and that's kind of when you get down into the Penfield Road area, Dublin Road. That's why that kind of bumps out. We've got a little additional sewer capacity and availability as you get towards Watson Road. That area drains down into Perrington. So the town of Penfield does not have any sewer treatment plant of our own. We have lots of pump stations and other stuff that kind of move sewage around, but we don't have it. All of our water is through the Monroe County Water Authority. We do own all our sanitary sewers as well as storm sewers, and we can get into ponds and talk about ponds and stormwater treatment another time, but just kind of going through zoning. So thank you, Doug. So going through our zoning districts, and I kind of want to go through them one at a time so we can pull up uses, and as we talk about single-family residential, the single-family residential district has more in it than just single-family homes. And that's always kind of a misnomer for people, is what else is allowed into there. What else can you have? So single-family residential runs anywhere from, we talked about RA2, so that's rural agricultural 2 acre. That's the east side of town. The conservation residential district CR2 is just along the bay. So that's kind of on the northwest end. And that runs along Arundequite Bay. Most of that is county parkland today. RR1, we talked about, as rural residential 1 acre. R120 is basically, we call half acre, but 20,000 square feet. R115 is slightly less than that, quarter acre. And then R112 is our smallest of single-family residential districts at 12,000 square feet lots. We do have lots smaller than that. Some are pre-existing and others happen through the Town Law 278 as a cluster. So we're seeing more of a trend that people want smaller lots, not as much to take care of, but you can still preserve land with that. So it kind of goes through, what the purpose of the district is. Obviously, rural agricultural is, residential as well as agricultural. One of the things that always comes up in the RA2 district is people move out there for the country, but it is still an active farming community that we have. We'll talk a little bit about ag and markets law, protections given to farmers, but New York State is very supportive of agriculture that's out there. So a lot of districts, we'll look at and talk about hours of operation and when things can happen. There's limits to it. Farmers don't really have limits to operation. If you got to get in at 4 a.m. and start, bringing in the crops or doing something in the fields, you've got the right as a farmer to go out and do that. Obviously, you've got animal byproducts, you've got other things that smell and dust. So that's some of the conflict that, we run into, that people move out to the country for the quiet and peace and quiet, but, there's still farmers that are active out there and doing what they need to do to have the business. We can get into talking about farm markets as well. And those are some of the ones that fall a little different than what our zoning code is. Again, ag and markets, allow some flexibility for farm markets to do things that don't normally fall under our code for that. So one of the first things obviously you can look at is permitted uses. So these are permitted by right, so a single-family dwelling unit or an agricultural operation. So those are pretty straightforward. You have accessory structures, so you have a primary structure is your house or your farm. Accessory structures, you get into an in-law apartment, you get into the normal things you would think of, pools, sheds, garages. That falls under their customary home occupations. This is another one that's a little bit different. If you run a business out of your house and it's just you and whoever lives there, you can run it as a customary home occupation in a residential district. So some people cut hair in their basement, do a daycare facility. As long as it's just you and you don't have an employee, you're not running a business, it's just, you're babysitting, you're doing hair, you do taxes on the side at night. So again, we kind of fall into having some small business type things in a residential district. So customary home occupations, and then if we scroll down, we'll get into, we talked about sheds, pools, tennis courts. Then we fall into conditionally permitted uses, and this is where it gets a little different. First off, churches are allowed in any district. You can't prohibit, that falls under RLUIPA laws, so restrictions, and I won't get RLUIPA right, but basically you can't have a bias towards any religion to not allow them in different districts. So that's why we have a lot of churches in residential areas, and we have churches in commercial areas. They kind of tend towards residential areas. The land's a little bit cheaper than buying commercial land. Yes.
So that they don't apply to the zoning laws for churches?
They
you're saying?
do. I mean, they have to go through site plan approval. They go through other things, but they can exist in a residential district.
Okay.
So they're not, you think of a big commercial with parking lot and everything else would be more commercial, but under state law, they can fall into a residential
But they can't,
district.
if there was an empty lot in a neighborhood, they couldn't just build a church on that lot.
They could if they
Oh,
go
they
through,
could?
if they go through the approval process. So, they- yeah, I mean, they meet it, and it's a conditionally permitted use. So that falls under basically a higher level of review by the board and staff. So basically saying if you meet these additional requirements, there's, churches, there's some buffer, you gotta have so much buffer area between you and the neighbor, knowing there's gonna be parking lots and traffic, talk about noise and impact and other stuff. So that's when you get under condition permitted. You can see our number 2 is hospitals. Currently in our code, we allow hospitals in a residential zoning district. So,
Yeah.
we don't, but the possibility is there, and that's one of the things that we've raised up is, who knows, what could come out there, but that's what allowed, currently in the East Side YMCA, there is a medical office operating out of that.
Oh, yeah.
Because it's U of R, they qualify as a hospital, so they were able to get in there as a hospital under our current, because that's still a residential zoning district. So as we scroll down through our single-family uses, we get down to K. That's how the YMCA came in and made an application. They said, well, we're kind of like the rest of them. We're sort of a playground, we're sort of a public pool, we're sort of a daycare, we're sort of, so they made the claims under all of these items in Special K, as we call it, is how they qualified under that regulation to fall, because that was basically an R1 district, so a rural residential 1-acre zoning district. And you think the YMCA, the building's 3 to 4 stories high with, 500 car parking lot, how does that fall under residential?
Cemeteries.
Cemeteries.
You could start your own cemetery if you wanted.
So obviously municipal buildings, the town itself, we're exempt from our own zoning. So we don't have to fall under that, but it does fall under residential. Obviously libraries, parks, nursing, daycare facilities, private playgrounds, bed and breakfasts, so all of these things fall under and could be in a residential district by your house, according to our current zoning. And that's kind of, obviously to your face, unknown to a lot of people, and different as, as we look at zoning, people think, well, I'm in a single-family residential zoning district, a single-family house is the only thing that can go in next to me, and that's
Cemeteries.
not quite true. Yeah, so there's a lot of things that can go in there, and a lot of things that can,
I'm good with that.
Horse stables.
Neighbors will be fine.
horse stables can affect you in that.
Really covered that.
Another thing is group homes. Group homes, again, so there's not bias, can fall under single-family residential zoning districts, even though they have multiple, as long as there's one kitchen, they're considered a home, so they have one central kitchen, they have multiple bedrooms, but they still fall under a single-family use with that.
How does Airbnb fit into this?
That's a good question. That is something that's new to us, and that's something attorneys are looking at, and how does that work? People say, well, how can you have a rental next to me? I mean, you can, I don't know if you're single in a house, but you can rent your house out as anybody can rent their house out within their neighborhood. The question, at least that we've had, Airbnb, yes, you're renting your house out as you would, just rent it out for a year, you can rent it out for whatever. The question falling under us is, can you rent out a bedroom individually? If somebody wanted in their house, they had a 4-bedroom house and they wanted to rent out individual bedrooms in the house, that would fall under more of a bed and breakfast. So if it falls under a bed and breakfast, then you'd have to have the main person living there, and then they're renting out rooms amongst them rather than just having individual rooms with, multiple people living there. Attorneys are looking at it, that's somebody above and beyond me, but, anybody can rent out their house. There's no rules and regulations against that. I know people always say, well, how do I have a rental next to me? Again, that's not something the town of Penfield can dictate, that it has to be a single-family, unit. It can't be rented, it can't be whatever. That's, outside the jurisdiction of what we can dictate. Any more questions on single-family residential before we kind of go into multi-residential? And I know some of this is kind of long and boring, but I think as we start looking at different areas, I just want to make sure everybody kind of understands what's involved in the district, what's allowed in the districts, and as we look at other areas and make recommendations that now we see this area should maybe switch to a BNR, or we're supportive of something else in this area. Roland, you had a question?
In your rural residential, do you offer a open space incentive as well? That kind of sounds, strange in an area like that, but there are communities that you'll have that if they, so to speak, offer up as part of the development a designated open space, which may be like a wetland or in something like that, in exchange for a little higher density that would normally have been allowed.
Yeah, we currently don't. That's something we can consider. I know Pittsford has some regulations above and beyond that they have to designate 25% of the land to be, dedicated to the town. Outside of that, each town's got a little something different.
In that, yeah.
And I say we'll talk about EPODs. Referring to we call them environmental protection overlay districts. That talks about woodlands, watercourses, wetlands, steep slopes.
Right.
So we've got a lot of other areas that have environmental concerns to them. Our EPODs, some of them are more restrictive than others, as you fall into like floodplain that's FEMA regulated, or you fall into wetlands that falls into regulations of the state and the federal. But the other ones, steep slopes, watercourses, we have regulations around them, but they're not prohibitions of development in them. So there is different things as part of going through. There's Mills, and thank you, Doug, for pulling it up. So he's pulled up the map that it's kind of got a lot overlaid on it. The blue shows the water courses. He's kind of highlighting where the 1,000-acre swamp is. So it's got blue is state wetlands. So state wetlands are 12 acres and larger. They also have a 100-foot buffer area around them. So you'll see on there, it's got a light blue line on the inside, and then a dark blue line on the outside is their 100-foot buffer area. They don't want you to do anything in the buffer area. It's kind of a filter strip to the wetland to protect it. Federal wetlands do not have that. Federal is kind of shown up in that orangey brown color, and those are dictated by the U.S. Army Corps. There's regulation over those. And then we have floodplains, Panorama Valley area. That's kind of our biggest floodplain area. That's regulated by FEMA. So that includes Panorama Plaza. A lot of development went on in the 70s or earlier, kind of before floodplains were really a concern. If regulations were as today, Panorama Plaza wouldn't exist and couldn't have been built. So we've got a lot of regulations when somebody wants to develop in there. It's called compensating cuts and fills. Basically, they can't fill more in the wetland than, so if they want to expand a building, they've got to do something somewhere else to compensate for the amount of fill that they put into that. But I'm getting a little sidebarred on EPODs. We can come back to that. So say, any other questions on single-family residential?
How does the Monroe County Agricultural Districts tie into your agricultural zoning?
So those are mostly on the east side of town. The ag districts, and I think if we have them on this tagged or not. So the ag districts mostly fall in our RA2 and RR1 district. At this point in time, you can get ag exemptions for farming in that area. Any time somebody does a development in the area, they have to sign an ag data statement basically saying, I understand that I'm moving into a farmland area. I understand there's smells and noise that's associated with that. It also allows the farmers some liberties to work with ag and markets. And
Does the ag district itself prohibit development?
it does not. No.
So it's just a tax advantage then?
Pretty much. I mean, it gives some tax advantage. We use it as the ag data statement, kind of informative to anybody that's moving into that understands the area that they're moving into, but there's not any current restriction to that. And then we'll get into town-owned lands later on. We'll get into open space purchases. That's not shown on there. That was the 2002 bond that the town put forth to buy some open space areas. Some we out and out own, others we own the development rights on. We can get into that a little bit as well. So going into our commercial districts, we have 4 commercial districts. So going from say least to most. We start with B&R. So that's our business non-retail. So business non-retail is basically, you can have an office building, you can have a doctor's office, you can have items up and until, selling items. Under that, we have allowed some hair salons, some other stuff. So if sales is like an accessory to it, you have an eye doctor's. So B&R currently we have along the strip across from Wegmans on 441. We've recently had a lot of doctor's offices going into that. We have Dr. Rengen's office right by Harris Whalen Schools. He does orthodontics and stuff with that. Obviously there's some, he's selling a product that he's doing, but you don't walk in off the street and say, I just want to buy a pair of braces to, for myself. So it's not a retail outlet, but some stuff you can get there. There's eye doctors and stuff in that. So it's kind of a business office related. A lot of it seems to tend towards medical with that. That's our basic. So we've got insurance offices, medical, dental, banks, attorneys' offices, licensed professionals, just regular office parks, and then ancillary items to them. And then each district kind of builds on itself. So B&R is kind of our lowest density of commercial properties. Those also have conditionally permitted uses. So drive-in tellers, funeral homes, again, religious is within this district as well, nurseries, and then a combination of B&R or single family. So each of used to kind of start with single family, and everything allowed in single family is allowed in B&R, and then each district kind of builds upon the next as far as what's allowed. Obviously, then there's setback areas. We're trying to preserve green space. As you go through it, we talk about it at 65% lot coverage. Obviously, if we allowed 100%, people would pave from property line to property line and fit the building as much as they can. We try to have some restrictions that allows businesses to go in, but also to keep it somewhat green, have some attractive elements to it that include stormwater areas, treatment areas with that.
How does like a green roof fit into that? Since it's actually on top of the property, does that count towards that? Is it just like an add-on, nice to have?
If it's kind of a nice to have right now. I mean, green roof, I don't know if we have any currently in town, or at least that I'm aware of. We've got rain gardens, we've got biofilters, we've got some porous, not a lot of porous pavement, but green roof is kind of new-ish. We kind of just look at it as a nicety right now. Otherwise, again, it would all just be taken up, and depending on how tall the building is, no one ever sees it, experiences it. So it's trying to have some green around the front and kind of buffer to the street.
What's a green roof?
Basically just greenery on top of a building, right? So instead of just asphalt or whatever the hell they put on top, tar or something like that, you have trees and bushes and grass and just like a big garden essentially on the top.
Anybody been
Absorb
down
sunlight.
to the
I-Square, I think, has.
I-Square's
part of
got some there, and then
some
also
area that's
does
green roof.
the county office building, outside the,
Like you'd see in New York City. That's what you'd see.
yeah, and you can handle stormwater up there, so that's an option rather than having a purely impervious area. All that comes off, it goes down a gutter, out onto the street. You basically fill up an area, allow, water to percolate through.
Well, I can tell you the biggest example of one is the Civic Center parking garage.
That's the one that, yeah,
But
that was
there every day, I guess.
several years ago, and they put
Never
it
knew
up
I was
there.
under a green roof. Thank you.
Yep.
Now I do.
A very multi-million-dollar green roof.
10 million, I believe.
Yeah.
Stimulus.
Yep.
That's the way to.
Reduce energy cost, right? I mean, that's part of the appeal.
I mean, part of it is cooling on a house. If it's on your roof, you're not getting the reflection off of it. You're obviously collecting stormwater, trying to recharge it into the ground rather than just have it run off, so it's less impact on the storm sewers. Some aesthetic value, you can make it nice
Insulation
looking.
value.
Yep, so. And then obviously there's hours of operation in business non-retail, 7 a.m. to 9 p.m. That's what you fall under. You can have hours less than that, but those are the regulated hours in B&R. Next one is limited business, and basically it says everything allowed in limited business is business non-retail and above. This gets into now the retail, so limited business, but you can have grocery stores, laundromats, drugstores, hardware stores. It's basically your smaller retail outlets would fall under a limited business district. Those are typically kind of buffer areas to the general business. So general business is most of your big retail, Wegmans, Lowe's, Home Depot, whoever's out there. And then limited business kind of buffers that. So as you kind of have your densest development impact, general business is 24 hours, then you kind of step back to limited business is a little bit less than that, but you have retail, smaller outlets, and then you kind of go to a B&R. So we kind of try to have transitions in our zoning, so hopefully, and we do have some spots, we have single-family residential abutted right to general business. So sometimes, a lot of times, those are considered incompatible uses that you have a 24-hour operation, operating right next to your single-family house. We try to kind of step down the hours of operation and stuff that goes with that. Limited business obviously has conditionally permitted uses as well. So that includes restaurants, takeout, gas service stations. What else is on that?
How do you keep out the undesirable businesses? Your gambling, adult entertainment, smoke shops, that sort of things. I didn't see that in there. And
Zoning.
Some is zoning, but one point of note, every town has to have an area designated for adult entertainment. So you cannot, again, same as religion, same as any other thing, you cannot blockade to have theirs. Ours basically is the way the zoning code is written, it falls within our limited industrial area.
Right.
Our limited industrial area is, a big portion of it is being proposed for development currently down off the Panorama Trail, down by LG Thermal Fisher. So as you're heading towards 441 as our limited industrial area. There's some proposal for development. They're looking at doing an office park and something else. But every town has to have a designated area that you allow adult uses within. You can't prohibit against that. As far as vape shops and other stuff, you have zoning, but you can't just say, I like your business and I don't like yours. And that's some of the stuff we started talking about last week. Is you can't zone somebody out. You can have your zoning, and obviously if they meet the rules and regulations and requirements, it's very difficult to say we just don't like your business or your business, and we don't want you here. We have a little bit of everything. In Penfield, you can't zone against manufactured homes. We do have several manufactured home parks in Penfield off of by Linden Avenue off of 441. You can have those one in a single-family residential neighborhood. As long as it's on a foundation, if somebody wanted to bring a mobile home unit and put it on their lot, they have the right to. Again, you can't zone against them, and you can't prohibit them from happening, so.
Has anybody done that?
Yes. And I won't point out where, but, it doesn't look as that, but it's pretty much a manufactured unit that was just set on a foundation, and it's got a deck and a patio, and it doesn't look exactly like that, but, again, there's a lot of regulations that, people look and say, well, the town, we shouldn't allow this, or we've got enough Starbucks in town, we don't need one more Starbucks. The town, go ahead.
I'm finished what you're saying.
Yeah, I said the town can't dictate if they meet the zoning district requirements. They could have a Starbucks, like New York City does, on every corner. We as the town can't dictate and say, we've got enough Starbucks, we can't have any more. That falls to them. There's a lot of things we get people we don't want, and I'm not going to name businesses, we don't want XYZ business, or we prefer to have this business. Unfortunately, as a town, we don't get to choose that we like this business over that. As long as they meet the zoning requirements, meet the conditions, the setbacks, and come in with the standards, they've got the right to build and develop.
So I guess my question is, can a developer, or I guess set more stringent requirements? For example, if someone, so I lived in Ithaca at one point, and we bought land in an area, it was all 1 acre lots, and there was a requirement that we build a house of a certain square footage, and we were not permitted to build a smaller house than that. We could build bigger,
Yep.
but we could not build a smaller house than. So how does that sort of
That would
kind of come together with?
fall under the
this
developer.
zoning?
Again, the town of Penfield can't dictate the size of your house, the color, what it looks like. a developer, and we have developments in town that limit, it has to be at least a 5,000 square foot house, you can't have an above ground pool, you can't have a fence, you can't park an RV or a camper in the driveway, that falls under the developer. The town of Penfield does not enforce those. If somebody comes to the town and says, I want a pool permit for an above ground pool, we can issue them an above ground pool permit, because that's not something we regulate. It's up to either there's an association or the neighbors, basically a civil suit between the neighbors saying you violated, the contract of, buying a house in, ABC development by having an above ground pool. A lot of times sometimes we know about them, sometimes we don't. They're not issued or filed with the town. But developers have gone in and said, this is the standard of what I want built here, this is the neighborhood, and obviously people buy into that, and you're buying into that contract, but that's, again, not
And
regulated by the town.
They let you know, the developers let you know that before, when they're submitting their plans to the
No.
town? No?
No, again, as long as they meet our basic requirements and standards, they can dictate that stuff afterwards. That's, again, that's basically a deed restriction on the property, so it's a filed deed.
A deed restriction.
That'd be filed on the land, and then when you go to buy the house or buy the property, hopefully, obviously, your attorney looks at that and you're fully informed before you buy the house to realize this is what I have to have, this is how big or small it can be, and what the rules and regulations are. Again, we don't enforce them, it's not a town
Right.
regulation, it's like a deed restriction, so, if you put in an above ground pool and Michael lived next door to you, it would be up to him to have a civil suit to, basically say, hey, you're not following the deed that we all agreed to, and it'd be handled individual. Great questions.
Well, there are some communities that do have those regulations on the book. I'm not a lawyer, but I believe from discussions I've had through planning courses and planning law courses is that they'd be unlikely to be upheld if challenged in court.
Especially if
It's
they
like
have-
Irondequoit, where I live. My house is, technically by Irondequoit standard, I could not build a house less than 900 square feet. If I wanted to, and I were to challenge Irondequoit court, nobody's done it yet, so we don't know what would happen. But the belief among planners is that, in all likelihood, it would be considered discriminatory.
There are deeds out there that limit who you can sell houses to as well. In today's standards, they'd be unlawful. There's ones that you can't sell it to this religion, this race. Those are deeds that are out there, and we've seen it before. Again, in today's standards, that I think they're unenforceable. But back in the day, people put in deeds saying,
All kinds of things.
yeah, all sorts of stuff that obviously a court wouldn't hold up anymore. But you can have deed restrictions.
There's a lot of times that people, I'm a realtor, and there's a lot of times that people will tell you what they think is in a deed from however long ago for a property that they're looking to sell, but you can't find it anywhere. But for some reason, the homeowners or the people in that neighborhood or that community think that there's this restriction that's out there, and it's kind of a phantom thing that never really existed.
Obviously, then again, there's limits on setbacks. So that's how we kind of limit things, is how far or close a building can be to a property line, how much green space you can have. Those are things that we can limit through zoning to kind of, I won't say box things in, but to kind of get the look that you want. It says we can't have more than 25,000 square feet of floor area. So again, to kind of keep limited businesses, smaller buildings rather than large big box. And then Doug, if you want to scroll down, please. Again, hours of operation, 6 a.m. to midnight under limited business. And then next we fall under is general business. This is our largest, so again it says anything permitted in business on retail, anything permitted in limited business. But it includes retail outlets, department stores, theaters, bowling alleys. Basically, this is your Wegman plazas, your large retail, fall under 24-hour use, operation, sales, trucking, that type of stuff. So those are kind of our most intense retail outlets. Those are permitted uses. Scroll down, and then again, if there's permitted uses, there's always conditionally permitted uses. These get into some of the more potentially controversial ones. You've got bars, taverns, auto outlets, repair, vehicle washing, hotel, motel, gasoline, and then again, Special K is other items deemed keeping in kind by the Board of Jurisdiction. Then again, dimensional requirements talks about how far from the property line. We do have some maximum height restrictions. Hour of operations are 24 hours. That's
You have a buffering requirement against commercial district against a residential district?
Yes, it's a greater distance. I think it falls under covering all districts, but I think it's I have to look up the exact, but yeah, if you're abutting directly a general business to a single-family house or single-family district, there's a larger buffer. You know, through zoning, we've tried to kind of buffer them by zoning, so you go general business, limited business, or have something to kind of as a physical buffer rather than just 100 feet or 200 feet between them. And then last, we fall under our limited industrial. We don't have a lot of industrial zone property in Penfield. It's kind of right behind Heidi's head. Most of our limited industrial is kind of that yellowish portion down along Panorama 441, so it goes into the West Camp Hakamo area, Thermal Official, Algae Nuke down there, as well as the other side is Dolomite property. The hotel along 441 kind of falls under a limited industrial area. Again, that's not retail, but it allows warehousing and some of the other elements that would go along with that. Thank you, Doug. And then a little piece along Linden Avenue and Hagen Drive, a little piece that kind of comes in that corner there.
I think you could undock now.
I know, I'm kind of enjoying this position.
You said you'd shoot the laser at you.
So those are our zoning districts. Now we can talk about some of the things that don't fall exactly to our zoning district. So we've got, as we talk about ag and markets, you've got farm markets. So farm markets, a lot of them are in residential areas, but they're retail outlets. So you've got farm markets, such as Schutz or Bauman's or Wickham's or any of the others that, they have retail component to them. They're not in a business non-retail or limited business area, but fall under the ag and markets law. There's a lot of protections that agricultural gives them. So they can, if there's agricultural components to it, sell agricultural products and then things that are ancillary to that. So you used to have Grossman's, they had plants for sale, other things, but they they had some playground equipment and other stuff that kind of falls under the ancillary use of that. Again, some of this gets controversial. We do have, that people do have hard cider at farm markets and other things that fall under. There's alcohol sales at some of those, but again, it falls under an agricultural component. So it's outside of a normal retail, it's outside of a normal general business area, but ag and markets is well supported by the state. Agricultural is very supported by them, so there's a lot of liberties and width that the state allows under those farm market areas. I actually jumped ahead, but there's two other districts that don't fall under any of those specifically. One is the Four Corners. So the Four Corners is 5 Mile and 441. This is kind of the older part of Penfield. This falls under the town board's jurisdiction. So all the other districts we went through fall under the planning board. So if you come in and say, I want to build a single-family house in a single-family district, you're meeting the code and requirements. It's a permitted use or even a conditionally permitted use. You make an application to the planning board, and we'll kind of get into talking about our process and how we do that. Working through those. If you fall in the Four Corners district, that falls under the town board's jurisdiction. So the town board handles that. It does not go through the planning board. The planning board may provide some technical comment as well as staff, as we always do. But the town board, because the Four Corners is so unique, their setbacks are very small. It's kind of more of a villagey feel. It doesn't fit into the nice easy box of a lot of our other areas. The setbacks may be 0 at a wall. Lot line is the wall. Front setbacks aren't there, so it kind of falls outside of those. So for some ease, a lot of businesses coming in and out. You'll see a lot of the town board work sessions that businesses kind of come and go, and town board reviews them and goes through a process with them, but anything that falls in the Four Corners district is under the town board. Again, it's a mix of uses in residential, retail, public services, businesses within that. So that's kind of a mix of uses. It's not an isolated single-family commercial. Obviously, you have apartments above restaurants and offices next to fire halls. You know, there's kind of quite a combination there. The other district that falls under the town board's jurisdiction is LaSalle's Landing. So as you're going on Empire Boulevard, you get down towards Basil's, which is now Mario's, as well as the new apartments. That's our LaSalle's Landing district. That was designated by the town board many years ago, trying to capitalize on the waterfront, or at least the area along the bay. Created that district, so it has area both on north and south side of Empire Boulevard. We've got restaurants down there. We've got obviously some new housing down there. Obviously, we've got LaSalle's Landing Park. So again, it's kind of a mix of uses down in that area. Again, that's an area that falls under the town board's jurisdiction and not under the planning board. I think I hit them all, but I think that's all the districts we currently have
Mixed use.
in our code. Mixed use, thank you. That's why I have have friends. Mixed use is our most recent zoning district. That is, and you can see over there is kind of that orange piece in the middle. I'll try not to blind Heidi. You don't have to duck for this one. Starting with the YMCA. So the YMCA we talked about earlier was kind of the start of our mixed use area. So this was, you can see we have R1, so rural residential 1 acre, RA2, it's 2 acre zoning. Mixed use kind of falls in the middle of that. That actually came out of the 2010 comprehensive plan. So that was a move from the 2010 comprehensive plan, and we're just seeing it come to fruition now. Since then, a lot of the recommendations this group may make, and it takes that long. Out of that, it came out that, there's a need, or a lot of other areas of the country, I don't know if people have been there, that getting back to the village setting, that people want areas that are walkable, bikeable. People may not want to have a car or limited use of a car, that they can kind of get back to a village. One of the things that kind of after the war, everybody kind of moved, or some of the World War II, everybody kind of moved out of the city and started moving to the suburb, and everybody wanted subdivisions and single-family houses and the white picket fences, and that's been great for the time that it's run, but now we've seen kind of a change in the market, that people want to go back to smaller lots. People don't want to spend all day Saturday mowing an acre lot or taking care of the lawn. They've got kids' activities, other things going on. People want to have more of a community, feel that they're part of a village. I can walk to a restaurant or go get my hair cut or do something and not have to get in the car and drive to a plaza. So a lot of what we've had to this point, and all the other districts I pointed out, is basically multi-use. General business is here, limited business is here, residential's over here. You buffer, you don't interact, you have separations, whether physical distance or through zoning you have separations of it. Mixed use is kind of pushing it back together, so it's kind of creating the idea of the four corners and kind of that villagey type feel once again. Having residential mixed with commercial, office, and medical all together. So that is just getting started for us. It was rezoned as of last November. So coming out of the 2010 comp plan was the recommendation for that. Staff worked for many years, had a committee, started talking about that, working with a consultant to come up with what are the parameters, what's the regulations, what will we allow, what won't we allow, how does that work through, and then ultimately up and through the town board rezoning that last November. We currently have 2 applications in already. For that, we have the YMCA. Just north of the YMCA was the former Wickham's property. You can see he's kind of winding down his fall activities there. He's moving over to Sweets Corners Road. So he's selling his property to Home Leasing and Episcopal Senior Life. So they're looking to come in with a senior package component between independent senior housing, so kind of in one building, mixed with assisted living as part of it, and then a memory care on the back part of it, and then also having a restaurant inside of it that serves the building as well as the general public, as well as out parcels from that. So I think Doug's pulling up the This is currently pending before the planning board right now. So you're looking at these buildings in the front. These are the independent living units here. This would kind of be a streetscape with, you know, possible restaurant here. It could have second floor office uses, but retail on the first floor. This would be the assisted living piece, and then kind of on the back side would be the memory care unit with that. So that's in as a preliminary final application before the planning board right now. It's not gotten its approvals yet. They're still working through details of it.
What does preliminary final mean?
It's always a
Preliminary final application, what-
Yeah, it's always a misnomer, and it doesn't.
Almost.
Yeah, it doesn't sound. Basically, we do our steps, and that's kind of the second half of our discussion tonight. Basically, our approval process starts with a concept or and sketch. Those words are interchangeable, but concept sketch. A developer, homeowner, realtor comes in and says, "I want to develop something. What can I do with this piece of property?" Again, we'll fall back to zoning. What does the zoning allow? And then, trying not to spend a lot of money, they can kind of vet out through the planning board and through the public, you know, what they want to do, what issues there are, what concerns there are in the public. Then they go back and decide whether they want to continue forward. The only time preliminary usually falls into it is when we're doing a subdivision. So it's, to me, preliminary means the beginning and final means the end. But, you know, you can get a preliminary overall. So as a subdivision just behind you is the Windsor Ridge development. They came in and got a preliminary overall approval for all of their units. So they said, we want to get an approval for all of them preliminarily, but then we'll get a final just for phase one. So then they started just the construction of phase one. They do the final details, how the sewers exactly lay out. They've got it all in the preliminary, so it makes sense. And then they get the final details in just that one section. So preliminary final typically only falls under subdivision development. Preliminary final, it's still called the same thing. Under an application like this would just be one process or one step. They could still phase it by constructions. They may phase and just do building one and then, you know, build it out as they go. We've seen that with some apartment complex. Ellison Heights has kind of done building by building as they've gone along. The same with South Point Cove, down along the bay. You know, they got approval overall for 9 buildings, and then they've built them as they've sold units. And
How many units are in Ellison?
300 and, Ellison Heights is 186. I thought South Point was 332.
That's a lot.
Yes, sir.
Not to be negative,
Uh-huh.
but my question is, you said that everybody, the town was looking for, the people were looking for this mixed-use district. Who was driving that? Does that come from the planning board or the town board? Because I don't hear any residents
That came out of the
asking for that.
That came out of the
And now,
comprehensive plan.
And you're trying to put in 400 some odd units on that farm field on 250? I haven't heard anybody in east side of Penfield that ever thought that was a good idea. So I'm just wondering, as consultants, who did they talk to find out that people want that?
That actually was a recommendation from the last comp plan. So not same group as these people, but the comprehensive plan group last time recommended it and put it forward. So it came from the committee. It didn't come from staff. It didn't come from the boards. The boards and staff are reactive to that. So it was.
But you're talking about some pretty substantial projects, not just building a hardware store and a couple of apartments.
It is.
I don't know if people realize, when they voted for the mixed-use district, I don't know if people realize that.
That I don't know. I mean, we had meetings with the East Penfield Homeowners Association. We met with all the neighbors around it.
And nobody in the East Penfield Homeowners Association was for it. That was a meeting. So I'm not trying to give anybody a hard time, I'm just curious as to what drives that.
I mean, I think and I don't want to speak for the committee, I think, you know, the initial thought was looking at, one, walkability, bikeability, and also providing, and we'll get into demographics at our next meeting, is for seniors and for young professionals. Our community, at least in the demographics we looked at, anybody that's graduated high school, young professional most typically moves out of Penfield. They don't find that there's a place here for them. They'd rather move to Park Avenue or somewhere else. So they want something that's more walkable, affordable, that they can have, you know, as well as obviously Monroe County is the fastest aging county in all of New York, and Penfield's one of the fastest aging around that. So the other is to look at what are we doing for our seniors, and we've seen quite a bit of growth in that area since the last comp plan. We've got, patio homes, we've seen a lot of townhouse developments. You've got Arbor Ridge off of Fellows Road, which is attached. Senior living facility, we've seen Timber Glen, which is single-family patio homes for that. We've seen Barclay, so we've seen East Hampton, a lot of growth in that market of seniors that want to stay here but don't want a single-family house. So not saying this is entirely targeted towards them, but I think that's, again, I don't want to speak for the committee, but I think that's what they were targeting, is that, the young professionals and the seniors that, kind of those either end, that aren't, either want to get out of a 4-bedroom single-family house on an acre lot or aren't quite ready to get into that, there's some transition between an apartment and a 4-bedroom house.
Mark, if I may.
Sure.
Having been on the 2010 comp plan. So as the committee was going through its land use evaluation and sort of potential for future land use, which sort of drove the comprehensive plan, and as we get into the land use map, you'll kind of see what was the vision of the time of the committee. It was, as Mark mentioned, the demographics at the time kind of showed as there is maybe too much of the suburban feel, too much of the agriculture feel. Maybe Penfield should look to sort of generate some of that younger populace, some of the senior populace, and maybe provide some different demographics or kinds of facilities or homes where they can live that really Penfield didn't offer at the time. So that's sort of the crux behind the mixed-use development coming out of the comp plan committee. So then, as Mark mentioned, it sort of moved through some very lengthy deliberations over the first 4 or 5 years before the town board formed a mixed-use committee, similar to what you see here today. Residents came together, kind of looked at their vision for that area. Then taking sort of the comp plan said, well, this is sort of the bubble of where we envision a mixed-use area, and then then the mixed-use development committee sort of started to put some nuts and bolts and started to define what they thought was compatible with the town of Penfield and what would work with that area. So that moved through the process. There were public hearings, and sort of then it was codified into zoning. What you are now seeing is you're starting to see the first few individuals presenting applications. And now I think you're starting to see some pushback on maybe these aren't the right developments for this area at this time. So that's sort of where we are in the process. So I wouldn't disagree with what you're saying about there's pushback now on some of the developments, but I would say that up to that point, until the first application is presented, the town, through the various uses of the committees and over the last 7 to 8 years of deliberations, saw as this area was sort of a decent spot for this mixed-use development.
Well, I would argue that people are pretty busy, and to go to a zoning meeting to redistrict a piece of land, people don't really realize what they're agreeing to until there's a backhoe in their backyard building 300 and some odd units. That's when it becomes an issue.
There's always that.
So.
Yep.
I guess I would like to add, I lived in North Carolina right before coming here, where there's a great deal of mixed-use development, and there is good mixed-use development and bad mixed-use development, and I think that the challenge will be, and it's certainly outside of our committee, and it's in the hands of the town board and the zoning committee and the planning committee, but to make sure that they look with great discretion at the exact type of development to make sure it in fact meets the perceived needs in terms of affordable housing for younger people with adequate transportation nearby and things like that. And it isn't just a kind of a cover name for just a different form of plunking 300 or 400 units in a particular spot, because I've seen some. I tried to live in a mixed-use development place because I thought it was such a cool idea and an environmentally friendly idea, but it was nothing. It was nothing like this.
I just think that people question the location of where they're doing it.
Well, I think that came about. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. We did a 250 corridor study back early 2000s. Basically, that is the last undeveloped piece along kind of a corridor. You've kind of got, along 250, you've got Webster Village. You come down to Penfield, you've got two state highways. You've got Atlantic Avenue 250, and there's really not much there now. You go further south, you get into 250, 441. You go further south, obviously you get into the village of Fairport, and you go down and you get into Victor. So there was looked at that area as there's an opportunity here. Currently it's zoned 1 acre, so either it can be more single-family residential homes, or it's also looking at, and we'll get into more next week, is getting into smart growth development as well as having things that are tax positive. As we
Or
look,
it could be farmland.
it could be,
Got
But it-
food somewhere.
but it has, I agree, but it has an underlying zoning to it. So it has potential for development no matter what it is. Every property in town has an underlying zoning. We don't have a farming-only zoning district. So if there's pressure and it's at the corner of two state highways, unfortunately, a developer can pay more than a farmer can for land. And that's just a reality that exists. So we're trying to have planning ahead of that. Do we want to see more single-family homes, which Penfield has a whole lot of and does very well? Or is there an opportunity to have something that's a little bit different, can provide some other opportunities as well as being tax positive? And we'll get into next week, 2 weeks, start talking about smart growth and what is tax positive. A lot of single-family homes, based on the size of the lot, the amount of infrastructure that goes in, utilities, costs, needs from schools, needs from plowing, are actually tax negative. Unless you build a certain size house, you don't pay enough in taxes to offset the costs of the services you use, whether it be from police, fire, just being there. So some of that is yes, you need a little more density, but to have a tax positive on the community rather than having more single-family homes with long roads and cul-de-sacs, and that takes a lot for plowing and other services, as well as utilities that stay in the ground for long periods of time.
You also have to impact on your schools if you're going that dense though.
It does, in the school district.
The schools are full.
But the school district has bought other lands, and half the town at this point really is not developed. So the school district has planned. They've bought property out on Harris Road. So that school district knows, well beyond my lifetime, that this town is going to expand and grow. It's just, it's an eventuality, it is going to grow. That they've already allocated areas. They've bought property and are poised to build schools and add on as needed. Obviously, Penfield's a great place to live, and a lot of people want to live here. So I don't see it declining. We're just trying to provide, or at least the town's looking to provide other opportunities or other avenues or locations for people to live. Just wanted to kind of run through a couple of our pre-existing non-conforming uses, and then give everybody a few minutes to get up, stretch your legs, go to the bathroom. I know I've been talking a whole heck of a lot, so. I see we've talked about our zoning, we've talked about what's out there. Under current zoning, there's a lot of areas or things that don't comply with zoning. One is Baker Commodities. I don't know if anybody knows Baker Commodities. Down on Browncroft Boulevard, basically it's a rendering plant. All of the animals that are picked up from the side of the road are taken to Baker Commodities and processed and made into other things.
It's an interesting way to put it.
I'll leave it at that, but, useful products, it's a useful service. But it does exist in the town of Penfield, and not a lot of people know about it. It doesn't meet the current zoning, but it's a pre-existing non-conforming use. We have 2 gun clubs in the town of Penfield. Again, that's kind of a rarity, but we have 2. We have the Genesee Conservation League down in the Panorama Trail area. We get a lot of people that move in, and as soon as they move in, say, "What's that noise?" And you got to make them stop. They've been here since the 1930s. They've been here, again, longer than anybody else's house has been here. Again, they've got pre-existing status, so you try to tell people and inform developers, and new people buy a house and come in, and we get calls saying that's got to end and you can't have that anymore. But again, that's a pre-existing non-conforming use, but they pre-exist our zoning and pre-exist other uses around it. Our other gun club is right here next to the town hall.
Nothing like baseball.
If everybody plays baseball over there, you hear shotgun shells going off all the time.
Saturday morning.
But they pre-existed this building and pre-existed the town hall being here, so,
GCL, so.
you know, most of their stuff is shotgun, they, you know, shoot the clay pigeons and everything else. Tennessee Conservation League, you know, basically you can shoot anything that's legal down there. Obviously, they've got parameters around that and barriers and everything else to make it safe, but different with that. Another one is Wilbert's Automotive Recycling. I think everybody knows them for their trees over on Salt Road. They run an auto recycling facility. Again, they pre-exist our zoning, provide a great service, but under our current zoning, they wouldn't be allowed, or two, you know, if they knew wanted to come in, they would never go there, but, you know, they pre-exist the zoning we have. So that's agricultural 2-acre zoning, and you've got basically a recycling, you know, facility amongst the middle of that. We also have a quarry in the middle of the town. That supersedes us because that goes to the DEC. So DEC has regulation. We used to have two. One we'll talk about in a second, but Wayland 250, or excuse me, Wayland and 5 Mile, Atlantic. Unless you look at it from the air, I don't think you realize it's that big and it's that deep. You drive by, you kind of see some pine trees on the outside and a few trucks kind of, you know, pulling in and out on Wayland Road. But I don't think you realize how big it is. You may hear a rumble at your house every once in a while when they blast over there, but it is an active quarry. They mine it every day. They also process asphalt out of there, bring in concrete and other stuff that comes in and out of that facility. And then the other one was Manitou Lake, that has since sold to a private individual, but that was the sand quarry. So they used to suck sand out of the lake on the one end, and then right in the middle piece was the concrete processing plant. So you had trucks rolling in and out of there every day, go down there, they pull the sand out, process the concrete, and then roll out of that. That one's no longer in use. That's out of there. The other side of the street, Allen's Creek Valley used to be a quarry way back in the day as well. So one thing we've gotten, and they've kind of staggered it down the hillside to kind of reshape that, but you know, now you'd never know that it was a kind of a quarry along that hillside. But I say one thing we've got a lot of is rock and Penfield, so they're making use of it. And then we also have historical properties. So again, pre-existing non-conforming uses, we have the Daisy Flour Mill, now is used as the gatherings, and that may be changing to something else. But again, our historical buildings, if they're designated, can be used for other uses, and that's something the other committee is looking at and will be discussing. Is the Clark House is historical property. It's in a residential zoning district, but it can be in use, and a lot of times they turn into restaurants or something to that effect. But knowing that, you know, keeping a historical property maintained and, you know, up to snuff is not easy. I mean, the Daniel Penfield house is, you know, a hair salon, so trying to keep
The Humphrey House signatures.
Humphrey House.
Yeah.
Those fall in the Four Corners district, so there's some flexibility,
Okay.
but yes, kind of
Historical building as well then.
historical buildings as well, that some flexibility is provided to them that operate, you know, in a single-family residential district. You know, it's difficult to have a house that big and, you know, maintain it, so oftentimes there are restaurants or other, you know, commercial uses within a single-family district. Any questions on zoning? I know it's dry to some extent, but it's the basis of what we do every day, so I figure that's the spot to start. If everybody wants to take a 5-minute break, stretch your legs, use the bathroom, get a drink, wander around, then we'll kind of start talking about, you know, what our approval process looks like. If somebody comes into the town, how's that handled? Look at, you know, what a 278 cluster development is, how a commercial development is, kind of step through some of those things. Okay?
Okay.
Thanks, everybody. Any questions on our earlier session? I know I throw them a lot at everybody and a lot of information and a lot of background, but I see zoning.
One real quick question.
Sure.
Don't tell anyone about that.
Do you guys have the land reclamation plan for the quarry? Or is that something that the state has? Because I couldn't find it.
Yeah, DEC has it. We have.
I can't find it. I looked in the
What's your contact?
Office of Mine Reclamation. I mean, I just looked on the internet, but
They have it in their office. I know we've consulted them most recently during the Shadow Pines purchase and everything else. That came up quite often. We were in contact with the state there. They were reviewing that because there was comments that nothing could be built within 1,000 feet, and there was other stuff that was put out there, and the state did respond back. And I can look up the gentleman's name that we talked to, but that's not governed by the town. The state took those over. So that's, all reclamation plans go and approvals to expand areas, all goes through the
Are they
state.
enforceable?
Yeah, I mean, the state comes out and inspects, and they've got to do, anytime they blast, they have seismographs around their
No, I'm talking
property.
about the reclamation for when they're all done mining.
Yeah, I mean, that goes through the state, and they'll, go back to what the reclamation plan was, and whether they need to soften slopes and make it safer on the outside.
What is the life expectancy of that quarry?
30 years.
They've
Another
said,
30 years or 30 years total?
they've said that they have at least 30 years left to mine.
30 years left, yeah.
But I know they're hauling a lot of rock out of Walworth, so that doesn't mean even after 30 years that it won't continue to operate as, I mean, they do asphalt there now, they do other stuff, but they believe they've got at least 30 years to mine currently, but obviously that can change, and they can still run asphalt out of it or other things.
They use it as a distribution point.
Yeah, and they may be extending that life by hauling stuff out of Walworth. We see a lot of trucks run by here in the day and bringing stone in and other materials.
What is the development on the old sand quarry?
Currently, there's one single-family residence on that property. So it was bought, and they've put their house kind of out on the point. So they've got a house out there. It's kind of a boathouse. They've have it for their own private property. Doug's pulling up that aerial photo.
Let's see it.
You're doing a great job, Doug. I mean, it's really.
And that's not it.
There
it is.
Holy moly.
Yeah.
Nice.
They wanted their privacy.
Yes.
Clearly.
I guess so.
Who knows what they're doing over there?
They've installed a gated entrance at the top.
Who has to plow that in the winter?
If you hike the Overlook Trail in Ellison Park, just to the west of that, you can look down and see it.
But the property does encompass the entire lake, so all of what was Manitou Lake or Redmond Lake is all their property.
Wasn't there some other lots?
What's the tax bill like?
There's 4 or 5 lots. right?
Yeah, if you look at all the different parcels.
See what it is.
I'd fall over.
In that lake.
Be sure.
1070B, there's a lot of little pieces. 36, I think, is theirs as well on the other side. So there's like 5 different parcels that all was sold. Dolomite said we're selling it lock, stock, and barrel. Here's 5 parcels. That's all our land, and it went up to auction. No one actually, I think the minimum bid was $1 million. No one bid on the minimum, so then
That's pretty cheap.
they went in afterwards and negotiated somewhere south of that to buy the property.
It's not on that much.
Just to put one house, they should have definitely done something.
Any other questions before we start talking about an application process and kind of what we work through, and then
The interesting thing about that is when you start to look at the 2010 comp plan, that area was the second mixed-use development district in town that was sort of put into the 2010 plan by that committee. So then halfway through the lengthy process, it was asked of us to sort of remove that portion from consideration on mixed use when the private sale went through. So the town did do that, and that's why there's only the one mixed use at the 250 Atlantic Road. But when you start to look at the land use in the 2010, if you haven't already, you'll see that it's actually bubbled there. So just something to keep in mind that, as you start to look through the 2010 and as you start to prepare or think about this round, just because it was in the plan doesn't mean it's actually going to happen, and just because it wasn't in the plan doesn't mean it's not going to happen, as I think we all can attest to with the Shadow Pines. So there are things that we can't foresee. But the best thing to do is just try to learn from previous comp plans and see if we can't help foresee. So when looking at the quarry, even though if there is a useful life of 30 years plus, that's not to say that this committee can't say, well, if down the road, maybe this could be a decent alternative land use, even though knowing that there's still a useful life there. So just something to keep in mind.
Okay, so we'll jump into kind of our planning process. Somebody walks in the door and says, I've got this piece of property and I want to do something with it. Where do we start from there? Obviously, first we find out where the property is, look at what the zoning is. They may have an idea of what they want to do. So all the stuff that shows up at the planning board, town board, that's probably a quarter of the people that walk through the door. We've got people that walk in and say, I want to do mini storage, I want to put an amusement park in, I want to do whatever, and I've got a half-acre lot in, off of Creek Street. No, it doesn't meet the zoning, and, so a lot of people, our job is, as staff, is to kind of call out the ones that, don't make sense. We'll sit down with people, we'll sit down with developers, homeowners that want to do stuff with their property and kind of at least steer them in the right direction before, they even get to the board. If and when they come up with something that may make sense, we'll work with them to kind of go through our process. There is a certain number of application materials that are needed. We look at the E-pods. We kind of broached on them earlier, so we kind of see what the useful part of the property is. So the E-pods is our environmental protection overlay districts. Again, those are watercourse, steep slope, woodland, floodplain, and wetland. So we have 5. So we'll look at those and see if there's any issues. And again, we have kind of our staff viewer. Doug, I don't know if you got that open. To pull those up, we've got a handy little GIS web viewer that pulls up all those things on our side. We can see where there's sanitary sewer, where there's water, storm sewers. A lot of the stuff is on the public side, so if you've gone through the public side, you can see all the E-pods, you can see a lot of the environmental stuff. Probably the only thing we don't put on the public side is the utility locations, and we kind of keep that separate. That's from Homeland and all the other stuff. Try not to put too much information out there where there's gas mains and electric lines and that type of stuff. So these are an indication to us that there may be some environmental sensitivity out there. By no means are they hard and fast. They're based on the actual on-site development. So we show a steep slope area. Once they get on the property and they do actual survey on it, they may determine it's bigger or smaller than what we show. Same with wetlands, floodplain. Floodplains are based on an elevation determined by the federal government. So the federal government says it's elevation 450. They want to do their survey, wherever that falls, that's where the floodplain is, not exactly what our map shows. So for us, this is just a kind of a guideline to say, hey, you may have wetlands, you may have steep slopes, you've got some issues on there. This is what you may potentially get out of the property. It may not meet all your wants, needs, and stuff before you buy the property. And then, as a realtor, we always tell them, make sure you get all your approvals before you put a purchase, or you can put a purchase contract in place, but we always encourage people, don't buy a property until you know you can get what you want on it. Because people buy property and then come to us and say, hey, I just bought this new piece of property, and guess what, I want to put Wegmans on there, and we go, sorry, it's not zoned for it. And then they look at us like we're crazy, and why can't you let them?
Now I just need sewer and.
Yeah, there's no sewers out there or other stuff.
So I have to get septic?
Yeah.
That was my other question about the mixed-use district. You were saying that the septic is or the sewer is limited over there. How does it fall into that, and how would that work in that capacity with all that going in there?
That's a good question. In the mixed-use district, we have basically 3 sanitary sewer basins. Penfield's always worked under the first come, first serve option, and 1, 2, you got to get sewer to yourself. So we've it's at the periphery right now. So as Doug's pulling up, that's the back of the YMCA. So currently, Country Club East is 1 basin to the west. The YMCA has a dosing system, so because they have the opportunity to, if they unloaded their entire swimming pool, they would basically backlog our entire sewer system. So they pump into a tank, and then they pump slowly out of the tank. So one pumps overnight, So it's offset because there's a pump station just down the street of that. So that's the YMCA's pump station here. There's another pump station just down in Rockbridge here. So that's why it kind of shows that as a force main, they force main over to our gravity sewer and down. So we've got one gravity sewer here that could feed up part of the west side. We've got, well, 3 other spots we can connect. Sanitary sewer here, which may serve the Wickham property. Sewer here, which is behind the, what was Hidden Hollow, over there. And then
So it would be able to
south-
tie in all the sewer.
It can, but if you're this property up here, you may have to wait, or you gotta figure out how to get sewer to you. I mean, and so that's why we kind of see it evolving, is the first person, we always have people extend the sewer to their property line. So they'll pick it up at their southern property line, eastern, western property line, and as the town, we have them bring it as deep and as low as we can up to the northern property line. The town could, if they wanted to, form a sewer district, and the town could fund through a bond that we would put sanitary sewers through that entire area. The town board has not indicated that they want to do that in this instance. Basically, each developer would come in, so we're going to, if we do see development, would kind of come in from the periphery and kind of work up from there. That's why you see the first property coming in is right by the YMCA. That's the closest spot for sewers. They'll bring the sewer, we'll require them to bring a gravity sewer line as deep as possible to their property line. And then I would assume then you possibly see the next developer pick up, just due to the cost that.
So that new proposed senior facility or whatever?
Yep.
Was that in more north?
Nope, it's right here.
Oh, it is, okay.
So this was Grossman's, this is Wickham's here. So they're gonna run a new gravity sewer. Actually, they're coming across the street.
You got it, because they're moving.
They're actually gonna tie into this sewer over here and then run it over across this way through here to get to it, because there's deeper grade on it. So they're gonna, at their cost, they would extend the sewer up to here. We'll have them extend their sewer up to this property line here. If and when this looks to develop, they would, extend it upon up. So it kind of, at the developer's cost, they add it and then kind of leapfrog up. We inspect it, and then we take ownership of it ultimately, and then maintain it from there, because each piece connects, so it's not private. One, the health department won't allow it. They don't allow private connecting into private, because if you don't maintain yours, mine's flowing into yours, then there's problems. So we take ownership of, unless it's a private lateral or a pump station, we take ownership of it, maintain it, as long as it's installed to our development. So we can start with that property there and kind of talk about, what a process is for there, since we're looking at it. So they came into us, that falls under mixed use zoning, so there's new parameters with that. They've got to show they've got a multiple of uses for that property. You pull up the code book and say, okay, for the size of the property they have, they've got to have 3 or more different uses on it. They can't just say, well, we're doing apartments, we're just doing senior. So they've got to show, meeting that mixed use development, that they've got to come up with a couple of different uses. So we sat with them, talked about what their uses were, talked about what materials they need. We looked at the EPODs, the environmental piece. We also look at seeker, and that's one thing we haven't brought up yet, is the State Environmental Quality Review Act. So that falls under all new development, is required to look at the impact on the environment, whether it be traffic, noise, streams, corridors. So as part of a board's review, they have to go through seeker, which looks at all those environmental things and sees how can you minimize them, mitigate them, how can you lessen the impacts to the environment on what you're developing. So that's a state requirement that also involves the county, so that gets the county involved, which they send off stuff to DEC and the health department, the water authority is part of that. So at the time we get an application in, we kind of work through that preliminary stuff with them. We also have a planning review committee. Our PRC group meets here every Wednesday morning, not every Wednesday, but most Wednesday mornings. It's basically an internal staff review. So we kind of give technical advice to applicants, developers that are coming in and want to do something. So we've got obviously engineering, planning, fire marshal, building department, highway, DPW. We all kind of sit around a table, bring in new applications, give people feedback on it. All of technical staff, we don't have a vote on any of the boards. So I don't have a vote on any of the boards. That all falls under the planning board, town board. But as staff, it's our job to basically be technical support and provide our expertise to them and say, yes, there's an issue with this, or no, there's not, or this is what we got to look at. So we provide them feedback. So on Wednesday mornings, it's open to the public. If you're ever bored and want to come in, we start at 9:30. We put up a new project and say, hey, Mr. and Mrs. Jones want to come in and they want to put in, a new grocery store, and this is what they want to do. Does that meet our zoning requirements? Does that meet, is there sanitary sewer there? Is there utilities for what they want? And then kind of each department goes through issues, concerns that they have. Fire marshal, how are we going to get fire trucks around it and service it with a fire truck? How are we going to plow it in the wintertime? How do we maintain it? So we kind of give some initial feedback to the developers. First and foremost, this is all before any boards even heard of these applications. We kind of try to vet out a lot of the stuff that either one doesn't have a chance, or two, they've got some more homework to do. So we kind of send them with some thoughts and ideas. They kind of go back and go back to the drawing board and start working on their plans to come in and actually make an application to the board. Questions? So once they're ready to make an application, we have both our town code and our design criteria that kind of stipulates out, here's what you got to do to make an application, here's how many sets of plans, here's the cost to make the application, here's our process and how it moves forward for you to actually to apply to a board. So we determine, if you're doing a site plan in a subdivision and it's in one of our single-family residential areas, it would go to the planning board. So we determine it goes to the planning board, and we see when their next available meeting is. We give them the schedule. We start to work with the developer to get their plans in order, get the stuff ready to submit to the planning board. Doug's pulling up some of our checklists we have for them to look at. If it falls into LaSalle's Landing or falls under the Four Corners District, we know that goes to the town board, and we work to segregate which group goes to which group with that. They work on getting their applications together. Under state law, the only requirement we have for public notification is to put it in the newspaper. Our legal location is the Penfield Post, and I don't know who reads the Penfield Post these days. Legally, we're required to put it in there. We do it for every application, so you read it, there's a little legalese on there, but that's the only requirement by state law for notification that a new proposal, new project is coming in. Town board has committed to going above and beyond that. We have a policy that we notify obviously all the immediate neighbors, and then depending on the size of the parcel, how many people surrounding that, we send a postcard out to everybody to say, hey, Mr. and Mrs. Jones are coming in with a grocery store, and this directly abuts your property in your area. We put it on our website, so at least our agendas are posted, and we put a sign on the property. So if you just drive by, you'll see, hey, property is under review by the town of Penfield. Please call. And then gives you our planning number, which would come into our office, and then we either can review it with you if you had a question about it. We have plans available to kind of go through. So we as a town go above and beyond that state requirement, just so the public is informed. And I can't say it's foolproof. Can't say we never get people, I've never heard of this and how could this have ever happened. But the town board has committed to going above and beyond that standard, which I applaud it, is great. We're not trying to hide what's coming in. We're not trying to hide what's going on. Unfortunately, we can't, send postcards to the entire town every time an application comes in. So there's kind of a balance to that. But at least if there's a sign on the property, and then, we post our agendas monthly, so if people, kind of want to follow the boards and what's going on, you can do that. Once we have our notification process, depending upon if it's a sketch plan or we've moved on to sketch plan, but a sketch plan, we basically work at least a month out with all boards. So somebody comes in right now, we're working on our November agenda for the planning board. So by this Friday, everybody needs to have their applications in full to be on our November agenda for the planning board. So that gives us time to get the plans in, have initial comments and review from staff, send them out to any outside agencies we'd need in that, and then get feedback to the applicant and the board ahead of time. So that's where that PRC committee comes in. We provide technical comments back to the board and as well as the applicant. So when they get up and do their presentation, at least they've kind of got some initial thoughts, concerns from staff for the board, and then obviously the board can share their own. If and when they go through the sketch plan hearing, there is no decision rendered, either from, and it's similar with the town board. The town board typically does a work session. If you've ever watched town board work session, you'll see my face here many times sitting, kind of bringing somebody that wants to do something with it. The board kind of vets it out first and then decides to set a public information meeting. Planning board has concept sketch plan, town board has public information meeting, same thing, same idea. Before somebody spends too much money, they can at least kind of show a parking lot, show where their pond's gonna fit. They have to kind of show most of the elements that it could happen, but not get into the high level of detail of a full design engineered plan before to know if it's even gonna fly.
It's a sketch letter.
Yep, so then the outcome of that meeting is a sketch letter from the Board of Jurisdiction, Planning Board, Zoning Board, Town Board, with basically feedback and saying, we've got concerns about the following items. If and when you decide to come back, one, you're gonna need a traffic study, you're gonna need a stormwater report, you need an engineer's report, plus we may or may not like this, and this, so they kind of detail out. The developer goes off and decides whether it's worth it for him, her, or the group to come back, and make a new application. A lot of times sketch plans come and they're rah-rah, ready to go, and then again, they fade off and you never see and hear from them again. A lot of times they're right back. This application came in for a sketch plan, just referring back to that mixed-use piece on the Wickham's property. They came in for a sketch plan in late spring. March of this year. Got feedback from the board. They came back for their preliminary final hearing in August, September of this year, and then they're still working on developing their plans, so it's still a tabled application before the planning board. So you can see bigger projects like that take quite a while. Obviously, it involves multiple agencies. The health department has to weigh in on the sewers. The state DOT, there's going to be impact to the traffic light. The YMCA already does have a traffic light, but they're developing a traffic study. What's the impact of that light? Is there impact to the other traffic lights around it? Do you have to adjust timing or turn lanes needed? When the YMCA originally came in, they didn't have a traffic light, but they had turn lanes with it. Ultimately, they did another traffic study and showed that the amount of cars they had necessitated a traffic light. So then one came after that. So they're still in their process of working through it. The planning board hasn't approved their project yet. They're still working on their sanitary and storm designs. They're still also working on their architecture and some of the layout stuff that the board had concerns with. Questions, concerns?
Oh, the LaSalle's area?
Yep.
Isn't that considered, is that floodplain in there?
Some of it is. Like the parkland that we have is floodplain. Along the shoreline, as people drove Empire last year, you saw the state DOT actually put a tiger dam. Is that big tube that they put to kind of keep the water from impacting northbound lane.
So how do you allow new development over there if that's not floodplain, technically?
Doug can turn on the floodplain layer. It's not all floodplain, but some of it is. So they, first and foremost, want to stay out of the floodplain. Current FEMA regulations is you need to have your lowest floor elevation 2 feet above base flood elevation. So if base flood is 200, you have to be at least 202. So either they could lift it up, or they have to do what's called compensating cuts and fills if they wanted to.
Like if you've seen the AutoZone in Panorama Plaza, the reason it's so high up and they have ramps to get up to it is because they're in the floodplain and they redeveloped that lot. They had to meet that FEMA regulation, so they raised the building up and did ramps to get up into
Well,
it.
and AutoZone also has gasketed things that fit in their door, so their finished floor matches the floodplain elevation. But in order to flood-proof the building, they've got to have gasket things that fit in the doorway, so if a flood happens, they've got to be able to seal their doors and windows, so the windows are elevated in that building. Like this property here, this is kind of the water. This is our park here. So one, we're looking at possibly putting a shelter or a bathroom outside of that. So first and foremost, stay out of the floodplain and build outside of it. If you do want to build in the floodplain, say we wanted to put the new bathroom here, we would want to fill that area. We would have to basically dig down an area outside of that floodplain more than what you filled in. So if you fill in 100 cubic yards, our code and regulation for our town says you have to do 1 1/4 times that. So you'd have to dig out 125 cubic yards of area that's above the floodplain and basically put area above the floodplain back into the floodplain to offset the area of what you fill. Floodplain is one of the toughest areas to develop in. The FEMA regulations continue to change. Flood insurance rates obviously are not going down, they're going up. As I said, Panorama Plaza, if today you wouldn't exist, you wouldn't have built anything there. It's there, it exists. If they ever want to expand it, it's going to be arduous for them to get through that process. So you've kind of established, here's your borders there. Right now, there's a property that used to be the carriage cleaners down there. That property right next to ESL down in Panorama Plaza. That property was leveled, they left the pad there. They cannot physically build any bigger than the footprint that they had. So they've kind of grandfathered in that they've got that footprint. They can't go any more than that, but they also still have to flood-proof the building that amount so they can keep their insurance rates below in that. But they came in and said, oh, we want to put an office building here, and oh, we want to modify. Said, you turn the floodplain on, that entire valley is floodplain, so they can't.
Build a slab on grade.
They have to do slab on grade. Well, it's also been a rock pile for years because there is contamination from the cleaners. They've been working with DEC to inject stuff into the soil. It would help to mitigate that. So they're trying to.
Was it a dry?
It was well, it was the dry cleaners. So there was contamination outside the back door of the dry cleaners.
It's
For
not
whatever
I don't believe it was ever
purpose here. I don't think it was.
classified as a super fund or anything.
It was designated brown.
Was designated?
Yeah.
It's a brownfield.
Yep, so they've been working for a long time just with DEC trying to clean up the property. They proposed to do a car wash there, a Classy Chassis years ago. Excuse me, now they're proposing to do an office building. They have to basically have the slab on grade, and then they're gonna have a vapor, basically create a negative vapor below that, and then put another floor above that, so you're drying those vapors out if there are any that come up through the soil and around it.
Any other office builders around?
So that's why that property has sat for quite a while. Somebody owns it. The cleaners obviously are long gone. The new owners are trying to clean the property up, do what needs to be to remediate it. But the chemical used is heavier than water, so it's not at the surface, it's going down. So, but it's those vapors that come up from there.
Just a question back at sort of LaSalle's Landing that ties to your comments about checking sort of EPODs and the seeker requirements and stuff.
Yep.
Isn't there a development being proposed that sort of comes down off of like the back side of sort of the Parkview neighborhood?
Yep.
That heads down toward Empire Boulevard there that kind of would end around LaSalle's Landing?
Yep.
What is that, is that, what's the story with that land?
Was the Galel property, go back, way back, it was Pecora property. That was a lot of fill brought in, so it was a valley, and again, before a lot of environmental regulations, the gentleman that owned it at the time just kind of filled the valley in. And
With anything?
With a lot of anything. So one they're doing is a lot of deep foundation testing of what's in there. We've not found contamination, which is good, but they may have to go deeper for piles or something else to make sure that they're on something solid. But they've been in before the planning board for a number of years to come up this. This is Pecora Road. Again, you can see our steep slope doesn't quite match. The steep slopes are here and then kind of off this side. So they're looking to come in that private drive and then have some townhouses kind of on either side of that, then connects into Wilbur Track Road and then go out to Empire Boulevard.
So then a steep slope is an EPOD,
Yes.
but that is not an EPOD that falls into the category of you can't do anything here. That's just like
Our
a
steep slope
buyer
EPOD,
beware.
yeah, our steep slope EPOD has certain, basically it's a higher level of review. It would be a taking if we said thou can't develop on this steep slope area, you can't develop in a, you know, a woodland, you can't do whatever, it'd be a taking, basically eminent domain. There are higher levels of review and elements into that. This area here doesn't fall into it, because basically our steep slope EPOD is anything 15% grade or more. Since this was filled, I mean, it's steep going up the hill, but it's at, I think, an 8% grade going up this grade here. The areas along the side here, it's kind of the valley comes down off the back of these houses, and there's some area that falls here would fall under our steep slope regulations. So they were trying to stay out of those. They were showing that they would just have this access right up the middle and have like a duplex here and another little unit. So they're kind of staggering going down the hillside. So they're looking to avoid our EPOD areas. But if Doug toggles back on our steep slope EPOD layer, our layer doesn't hit exactly. Again, it just kind of gives us a reference that we know there's steep slopes in the area. They actually did topo out there, came back and said, here's actually where the slopes are, and then that would, so ultimately we should take that data and go back and refine our steep slope EPOD to
Does that
correct
account
it.
for the slopes that were there previous to the fill, or is that
This
measuring?
was based on our
fill?
aerial flow LiDAR data,
Yeah,
which
so
is
it-
accurate-ish.
But it picks up trees and it picks up other stuff, so I mean, it was.
But decisions are made on what's physically
Yes.
there now?
Yes. Yep, same with wetlands, and
But
we
then
show.
stability has to be tested.
Yeah, we get data from the DEC and from Army Corps saying, here's where we believe the wetland limits are. Again, it's on a map that just gives us an indication as we're looking at a project that there may be wetlands there. They're required to go out and hire a wetland specialist, a botanist, to go out and actually do soil testing and then delineate it, survey it, and then come back to the town and see here's where it is. It may be bigger than what the map showed, it may be smaller, may not even be on their property. It's just a kind of a reference for us to check to say, hey, we better pay attention that, you know, there may be some environmentally sensitive areas on this property.
Thank you.
One of the things we didn't talk about was the Zoning Board of Appeals. Zoning Board of Appeals works in conjunction, I mean, they work on anything from sheds and pools and setbacks, as well as providing variances to what the code allows. So everything in our code has an appeal process to it. So even when we say it's a hard, fast rule and regulation, there's an appeal process to that. That's the Zoning Board of Appeals for at least the planning board items. The town board, if it falls under LaSalle's Landing or Four Corners, they don't have to go through the Zoning Board of Appeals. You know, they can adjust the regulations, you know, as needed through there. But so whenever we say we've got a code, a road, a rule, or regulation, as most anything in life, there is an appeal process to that, and that's our Zoning Board of Appeals.
You can flip like Board of Appeals.
Yep. Yep. I mean, you can appeal the state laws and rules and regulations and.
The 2-foot lot.
Yep. The other thing we didn't talk about, and it's shown on our map over there in some hatched areas, is Town Law 278. So I think it's got to be, well, this property is the one that's up on the wall over here. This is a 278 here, so we've kind of showed some hatching on it. That's a state law. It used to be Town Law 281. I don't know why it changed, but to be Town Law 278. But Doug, if you can flip that map behind you, or Phyllis, if you can just flip that map back one. So one of the planning techniques that's been utilized or done is to show, they have to come in showing a conventional plan first and foremost. So they have to show, this is the zoning, so that zoning was R115. So they have to show that all the lots they can fit on the lot, on the property, meet 15,000 square foot minimum. They don't need any variances. They accommodate for the roads and the right-of-ways. They accommodate for a stormwater pond area on their site to do that. So they came in, this is the Windsor Ridge development, this is Atlantic Avenue, 5 Mile Line. They came in and actually showed that they'd have a little private drive, kind of one of those eyebrow driveways. We've got some off of Wayland Road on 5 Mile Line. They would, you know, build it all the way out to the edge of the road. People's rear yards would abut Atlantic Avenue. They'd have the pond at the corner, which is similar. So they have to establish what their overall density is. So they show we can fit, I think this was 86 homes. We can fit 86 homes on this property. They then say we would prefer to do smaller lots. We think our market is smaller lots. We would rather pull those, you know, make it a little more condensed, get the houses away from Atlantic Avenue, pull some of that stuff in, have one consolidated entrance, not have the little eyebrow, loop off a 5-mile line. So we want to utilize what's called Town Law 278 and preserve it. You're preserving woods, you're preserving open space area. It's at the discretion of the Board of Jurisdiction. So they came back and said, now this is turned. So 5 miles here now, north is to the right. Here's Atlantic Avenue. They said we'd prefer to come in, make these lots a little bit smaller. Some are deeper, some are less than 15,000 square feet. So you can make the lots below what the zoning is, but the one caveat is you cannot get any more lots on the property than what you show in your conventional plan. So they showed they could fit 86 lots conventionally. The board could say, yep, we agree. They went lot by lot and said, does this one meet the dimensional requirements? Does this one meet this dimensional requirement? They went through, and I think originally they were at like 93, and the board said, no, this doesn't fit, no, that one doesn't make it. And so they worked to get to 86, and they said, okay, we agree that 86 is your conventional plan. The board could have approved it at 86, could have approved the conventional plan, but they said, no, we'd like to preserve more of the corner, preserve the tree that's out there, get these houses off the street, preserve more of a buffer along the road, get the houses off Atlantic Avenue, and push those in. So they basically condensed some of the property. There's still 86 lots on there. They did not get one more house, but could go smaller than that zoning. So even though it's a 15,000 square foot, you may see some 10, 12,000 square foot lots in there, but they didn't gain any more. And then now, all of this property can no longer be subdivided in the future. So that's why we hatch it on our map, because we've had people come back and another bite from the apple and say, well, now that I got this chunk of property here, can I just fit one more house, or can I fit something else in there? And that's forever restricted under that Town Law 278, that they can't come back and further subdivide. You can't come back, even if somebody in the subdivision said, hey, I've got me and my neighbors want to combine and put one more house in the back. It's restricted against any further subdivision with that. So that's just another tool in the toolbox, but just wanted to highlight that as you're looking at your zoning map, and you kind of see these hatched areas that say either 281 or 278. They're the same thing, but it does show how it got smaller than what the baseline zoning was, and how they could cluster those in a little bit more. I think Doug's showing Meadowbrook. That was one that originally came off of this farm on the corner. So this was the farmstead. Right now we're on Shoecraft. This is State Road here. So anybody's up in the Meadowbrook neighborhood, they basically did a conventional plan showing the whole development on there. Doug, if you want to zoom out a little bit. So they kind of split it into two. So they've got single-family homes on the north end, and then they've got townhouses on the south end. It's not a townhouse zoning district, but they can put townhouses in there because they're showing it as a cluster plan for that. So now they've got the open space areas. If you've driven up Shoecraft Road, you kind of see those wide expanse of grass, open areas in the front. They've got a walkway and stuff. This is town-owned actually here in the back. This is under their association, but there's a walking path around the pond. This falls under an HOA here. But this house at the corner, you've seen that farmhouse has been up for sale for a number of years. And somebody wants to come in and subdivide it and said, sorry, it was under Town Law 278. That was previously subdivided. It's forever a 5-acre lot, and it stays what it stays. So you kind of got your one bite at the apple. You sold to the developer. You got what you got out of it. You can continue to operate this as a single-family house. It can be a farmette. You can do something else with it. You just can't subdivide it and make it into more lots than what it already is. Other things we haven't talked about, rezoning. Rezoning is an option under state law. You can always request rezoning from the town board. The only group that can do a rezoning is the town board. There are regulations about that as far as spot zoning. So you can't say, I, Mark Valentine, want to rezone this property to general business just in my own property. There's laws against that, so that's considered spot zoning. It's not attached to anything else that's general business. It only impacts me. So usually you need multiple properties and petition to do that. There's also incentive zoning, which is in our town code, where you can basically get some extra units on the property for an offset of some value to the town. In the past has been to put in a regional pump station. The developer, as the town, we don't want to take over a pump station for each new subdivision that goes in. So we may have to say to the developer, hey, why don't you put in a regional pump station and serve multiple properties, so we're only going to take over and maintain one rather than 5 different pump stations. So you as the developer can gain 5 more lots or whatever that value is within your subdivision, help offset the cost of what the increased value of the pump station was. It's not used very often, but it has been an option for some developments around town to use incentive zoning to get higher density on their property, but they've got to provide some value back to the town or to the community. It's been used to buy open space area properties as well.
Yeah, sidewalks.
Sidewalks, currently it goes to the drainage sidewalk fund. So it pays for townwide sidewalks if we do have any that's unallocated for anything else. It does go to the general sidewalk fund and then install sidewalks within the community. Yes.
Can any new categories of zoning be created?
Yes. It just takes a while. As mixed use, it took us from 2010 until just last year. But you can create new zoning districts. Other communities have different zonings out there. So if there's one that was thought or suggested, typically it's easier to upzone someone than to downgrade their zoning. Obviously, you'll have their support of it. We have areas, the areas that I'm thinking of in front of Harris Whalen Park. The frontage there, those houses petitioned the town board. The 9 on the west side petitioned the town board a few years ago to have their zoning changed. They basically said, we've got a school behind us, we've got Wegmans across the street from us. It's really not conducive to single-family house living anymore. They petitioned the town board went through public hearings, listened to that. This side was BNR over here for a number of years, this side was not. They petitioned the town board to be rezoned to business non-retail. Now we're starting to see Dr. Rengen at the corner. There's another house just came down. There's a dentist office to go into there. It's easier to, let's say, upzone somebody to a higher density. Not saying you can't change somebody's zoning to a lower density, but more often, obviously, it could be seen as a taking if your property was zoned general business and we wanted to rezone you back to single-family residential, you're losing out on value of your property going from general business to single-family residential.
Or half-acre to 2-acre.
Yeah, people can ask for that, and it can be done. But there is obviously lawsuits that could ensue of, taking the value of somebody's property. They have to have a reasonable return for what their land value is. And what a reasonable return is, again, is up to attorneys and judges and stuff like that. But yes, a new zoning district could be created. Obviously, mixed use came out of the last.
Well, I'm thinking
comp plan.
for protecting things like parkland and open space and things like that. So that
yes, we can consider a new zoning district for that. Some of the stuff, if it's owned by the town, it's protected, under the town. If it's designated parkland, you basically, the town even can't say we want to, this to unbecome a park. Basically, it's considered alienation of parkland. You have to go through the state attorney general's office, has to be signed off by the state legislature. So it's even cumbersome for the town if we said we wanted to sell off part of this campus and we wanted to sell it to somebody and sell off parkland. That's cumbersome for the town to even do. But we can look at, as part of this process, we get into it, look at, creating a new zoning district. They say every property currently has a zoning to it, so we'd be proposing a change in their zoning, either up or down, but if we're looking to protect it, we'd probably be downgrading their zoning to something less than what the current zoning would allow. Just looking at my notes, what else I didn't go through. It's 9:01. Again, threw a lot at you guys tonight, a lot of information, but I see zoning is the basis for everything that our boards do. That's where it starts from. At the next meeting, we'll start to kind of talk about the past comp plan. So take a look at it, see where we can continue, what was good about it, what wasn't good about it, what you liked. Then we'll start talking about areas of town that we've looked at as whether, there's consideration for rezoning of them. We can talk a little bit about utilities next week, so we'll pull up our sanitary sewer maps and show you where our sanitary sewers go. That kind of feeds into what zoning's out there. You can zone it, but if there's no utilities to back it up, it doesn't really benefit that. We can talk about stormwater and why we've got stormwater ponds and some other stuff in 2 weeks. So in the meantime, if you have any questions, obviously feel free to reach us and contact us about it. We'll put whatever additional information data comes up on the Google Docs page between now and then.
Is there anything other than just generally reviewing the comp plan that we're supposed to be doing? I see something that says homework, so I'm just like,
Yeah, I mean, I think.
Should I write the homework?
Yeah, I think the next time we're going to look at the comp plan and the different sections of the recommendations that came out of that comprehensive plan. Kind of what do we like, what don't we like, what can we build off of. We can talk about, the zoning districts and areas, areas that, we can see whether we want to change them, leave them alone, look at whether there's new zoning, some of the stuff to look at, and then, we may do some tours out and drive around and kind of look at other areas, and we can do something in the future to kind of look at properties as a group or individually. Thanks everybody for coming. Appreciate your time.
Thank you. So we'll not be here on the 9th. Well, watch.